In the city, we gon' slide, bet I be there pronto.
I'm gonna turn it over to Lee, because before we even get into what's happening now with the Supreme Court and affirmative action, we've come a long way with this issue, right? All the way up to it being codified in places like the Supreme Court. So give us some history, give us some background, consciously. What is it about the affirmative action that has shaped our society so much and gotten us to the point where we're negotiating its efficacy in the Supreme Court now? How do we get here?
Man, before I read y'all know my motto: research over me search. Before I read this though, from Britannica, I feel like coming straight from, you feel me, like some dictionary type shit. It's important to recognize there was a reality or status quo that had policies that was incentivizing the exclusion of Black people and the exclusion of different people based off of identities. And the affirmative action literally was, Toya said the word algorithm when we was coming up with this. So it's really being able to try to get some things in institutions' algorithm that accounts for the way in which it's baked into the algorithm to be exclusionary and or discriminate against people. But affirmative action in the United States is an active effort to improve employment and educational opportunities for members of minority groups and for women. Affirmative action began as a governing remedy to affect the long-standing discrimination against such groups as consisted of policies, programs, and procedures that give limited preferences to minorities, women, and job hiring admissions, institutions of higher education, the award-winning government contracts, and other social benefits. What we recognize is that the typical criteria of affirmative action are race, disability, gender, ethnic origin, and age. Before I go on and read, this recognizes and acknowledges that a lot of institutions in our country practice exclusion on the identities of disability, race, gender, ethnic origin, and age. So when you start talking shit about identity politics uniquely, it is important to acknowledge that identity politics has always already been a tool used in America that has been able to dictate who gets what, when, where, and how. I'll keep on reading just a little bit more just to give like the context of some more history, and then, you know what I'm saying, pass it over to you. But affirmative action was initiated by the administration of President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1963. He was president from 1963 to 1969 in order to improve the opportunities of African Americans while civil rights legislation was dismantling the legal basis of discrimination. The last sentence I'll read is that the federal government began to institute affirmative action policies under the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964 and an executive order of 1965. Before I pass it over to you, sis, what I know as a diversity and inclusion facilitator, what I know as a researcher of diversity and inclusion and as a debater, when we talk about all efforts of DEI, is acknowledging the failures of integration and the failures of a lot of these civil rights policies. So when we pass it over to Toya and we think about the ways in which affirmative action potentially can be overturned, it's important to also acknowledge everything that is implicated.
Absolutely. We've gotten some background, we've gotten some context, we've gotten some important things to kind of keep in mind as we shape and kind of fill out this conversation. But what we know about affirmative action as it's materialized itself, right, even as an offshoot of things like the civil rights movement, is that it very uniquely has helped and assisted. It was created in response to Black issues, but it very muchly has assisted and allowed for Asian Americans and white women in particular to gain access to institutions, institutional powers, privileges, resources that they wouldn't have otherwise as well. So it very much was an investment in the betterment for everybody, despite the perception that it is not. Now, I want to kind of get into some of the major kind of talking points, perspectives, ideals, and we're going to get the chop back on here in a minute to just kind of tease about and see if we agree or disagree, because these are things that I've actually heard from people on both sides of the issue, right? That I was surprised to hear from both Black people, but also white folks and Asians as well, and a lot of conservatives. The first is that affirmative action is de facto racism, right? Or that it's actually de jure racism. De jure meaning it is a type of issue or kind of idiosyncrasy in the law that is justified legally, right? And so it is something that has been put into place to reconcile or mediate a certain issue, but it's kind of created another one. It's created the same issue it was created to mitigate. So do you all think, And here's of course, the obvious reasons why people are saying affirmative action is racist is that the underlying kind of logic there is that Black people are not intelligent enough, not capable enough, not equipped enough to go and thrive inside these communities, that they need a hand up, that they are in such a position of dereliction and disposition and incapability, incapacity, that they are unable to participate. So it's a smack in the face of Black people.
I hate it.
To have affirmative action because it sets up a world where then they have a self-fulfilling prophecy that they need somebody else's help in order to get up, get out, and be successful. What's the take on this particular position?
We a private chat, Damo, for 45 seconds. You know what I'm saying? 45 minutes, man. But when people say that when both Black and white people push back against affirmative action, it is a result of racial illiteracy, the inability to read and write situations pertaining to race. The reason why it was important that we laid down the historical context of affirmative action, it shows you that Black people being unintelligent has never been the issue. Never been the issue. When Black people are being excluded from institutions of higher education, being excluded from the law, being excluded from other public places, it was never because we didn't have the mental capacity or the intellectual capacity. It was because of discrimination and exclusion. So when we point out, you feel me, the University of Oklahoma or Harvard was constructed to be a predominantly white institution that was made for the access and at the expense and the exclusion of other people, it is acknowledging that these institutions have preference baked inside of them for white people.
Yeah.
So when you say like, man, we ain't smart enough, I don't need nothing. I don't need nothing. I'm just as good as I can do it, as much as the white man can do this, that, and the other. To me, it literally glosses over how access is always influenced based off of identity. The reason why they made affirmative action is because all these identities, regardless of their intellect, will be excluded.
Bro, that's why I feel like some of the most revolutionary shit that I heard was from Stokely Carmichael. And I read his book on Black Power. And actually, before I read his book on Black Power, I read Look Out Whitey, Black Power is Gonna Get Your Mama by Julius Lester, where he introduced me to Stokely Carmichael's stance on the Civil Rights Act. And that's that it wasn't an act for Black people.
Mm-hmm.
We knew we should be able to drink at whatever fountain we wanted to. We knew we should be able to use whatever restroom we wanted to. The Civil Rights Act was for white people to tell other people, stop, like get out these people way when they trying to use the same facilities that you're using as a citizen of the United States of America. Right. And so this argument about like, well, this is saying that Black people ain't smart enough. No, it's saying that if we don't put forth an effort, if we don't actively work to make sure that Black people or other minorities are getting opportunities that white people get, they won't get it. George said it in a very nice way. I'm gonna keep it a stack. If we don't say, hey, let's make sure everybody's getting a fair shot, everybody won't get a fair shot. And we know this. You know what I mean? Even with affirmative action, there's such disparities in like those extremely high paying jobs, disparities in education, is disparity across the board. The disparity still exists even with affirmative action. So the idea. But and that's why. So it's like the idea that affirmative action exists to pander to people who think like Black people, for example, aren't smart. No, it's to push back against the hiring managers that assume that mindset does exist, but the people you attributed it to, you got it completely wrong. It is the people who tell you that we don't need affirmative action who believe that Black people ain't smart enough. Right. It's the people who tell you we
had the president as a result of affirmative action. 43 presidents literally was the president because they were given preference in the race that excluded other individuals.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like myth of meritocracy. A lot of our country lost in the South Senate, and I feel sorry for them. So when we recognize that we have to work 5 times harder to get X, Y, and Z, that is acknowledgement that we're not being lazy, and acknowledgement as well that the exhaustion that niggas have to go through to get access to the same institutions that a lot of individuals have because of nepotism, because your granny gave $50,000 and you feel me? Like when you think about that, I think it's 52% of Harvard students are already on the, like, you feel me? All right,
it's only 52%.
Or on or some random sports scholarship that they really don't play, or you feel me? It's just like, what we doing? What are we saying here? That's affirmative action.
One thing I do want to get back to is the comment that asked about the book you referred to, Plug. At the top of your response, you started talking about some author, some book, and somebody was like, what was that book again? So drop the context so people gonna do some external reading.
Michael,
man, I forget how this book ended up in our house in Oklahoma, but it was called Look Out Whitey, Black Power's Gonna Get Your Mama. By Julius, no bullshit, by Julius Lester. That was the book that introduced me to Stokely Carmichael. And then Stokely Carmichael's book on Black Power is kind of, then you got Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. So it's, you know what I'm saying, but the book I started out with is Look Out Whitey, Black Power's Gonna Get Your Mama by Julius Lester.
Beautiful. Chef's kiss, right? So I you know, as we have this conversation, one of the things that we think about when associating affirmative action with racism is the idea that we are in some capacity in a post-racial society. And I think that is a move that far too often different politicians, different Black people, because we have Barack Obama as a president, because you can walk into an admissions office and find a Black person, because you see these different people on these campuses and in these institutions, we start to feel a whole lot better about kind of what's happening. You know, Black women are more educated than they've ever been before. Black men are closing that gap and starting to get their degrees at a much higher rate. And so we have this weird kind of impression that we've gotten there and we've achieved enough, so we don't have to set up in the system ways for individuals to navigate. And I think that does us a great disservice, because what do we see time and time again is that Black people are not in positions, like literal positions in these institutions that matter enough, not at a high enough rate to be like, oh, we can step back now. Niggas will help themselves through the system, or there's enough Black people to ensure that these racist, sexist, ableist things, aren't happening. There's enough disabled people getting access to jobs now where we don't have to worry about ableism. There's enough of these stop checks, these stop gaps in the system, and that's just not the case. Right. I think still we look at time and time again the way that a lot of times these issues have been able to be perpetuated because we're not there yet, baby. I know it feels good. I know we got these diversity days on campus. I know we calling consciously to come on campus now. Look how progressive we are. Look how all of that shit is cute, but we're not nearly as far as that matters, right?